The storm that had been brewing for hours finally broke with a tremendous roar. The air crackled with energy as the earth seemed to shake beneath Ellen's feet. The blood moon, now high in the sky, bathed the world in its eerie red glow, casting long shadows across the beach and the sea. The storm had been building, and now it was here uncontrollable. Like the power within Gyrith that had finally been unleashed, Ellen stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. The wind howled as if warning him to turn back. He had never seen anything like this before. Gyrith's transformation was unlike anything he had imagined. Her wings, vast and powerful, spread wide, sending gusts of wind that knocked him back a step. The air around her shimmered with the raw power she was now wielding, and yet, despite the fearsome sight before him, Ellen could only think of one thing: Gyrith. The dragon, for all her strength and majesty, was still the creature he had come to care for, the creature he had vowed not to leave behind. Gyrith's massive form shimmered under the blood moon, her scales now glowing with an inner light that made her look almost ethereal, like a spirit of the sea. But the power she was wielding, the energy that was flowing through her, wasn't something she could control, not yet. The barnacles that had clung to her body for so long were now dust in the wind, and her once dull wings stretched wide, the force of their movement sending ripples through the air. She let out a roar, one that shook the earth itself, and Ellen instinctively took a step back. The roar echoed across the sky, a sound of both pain and release. The cry of a creature who had spent too long in chains. "I told you to leave." Gyrith's voice broke through the roar, low and strained. She was struggling, the curse within her now pulling at her very soul. "I warn you, Ellen. The curse, it wants me to destroy everything." Ellen shook his head, his eyes filled with determination. "No, you don't have to destroy anything. You're not alone. We can stop it together." Gyrith's eyes, glowing brighter than ever, flickered toward him, and for a moment there was something in them, something soft, something like hope. But it was fleeting. The power inside her was too strong, and with each passing second, it threatened to overwhelm her. "I can't hold it back anymore," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "The curse, it's too much." Ellen's heart clenched as he took another step closer, despite the powerful winds and the trembling ground. "You're stronger than this. You've been fighting it for so long. Let me help you." But Gyrith pulled back, her wings snapping open with a force that nearly sent Ellen sprawling to the ground. She was too powerful now. The power that had been building for centuries was too much for her to control, and the beast inside her, fueled by the curse, was threatening to break free. The sea began to surge violently, the waves crashing against the rocks with a ferocity that mirrored Gyrith's struggle. The sky above seemed to darken, the red glow of the blood moon growing brighter as the curse reached its peak. The world around them trembled, the storm's fury growing with each passing moment. Ellen stumbled, but he refused to leave. He couldn't. He knew Gyrith wasn't lost, not yet. There had to be a way to break the curse, a way to save her from the destruction she feared she might bring. "Please, Gyrith," Ellen shouted, his voice barely audible over the storm. "I'm not afraid of you. You don't have to fight this alone. Let me help you." For a moment, Gyrith's eyes softened again, just for an instant. But the power of the curse surged within her, and the look of hope was quickly replaced with fear. The power inside her was like a storm, and it threatened to destroy everything around them. She lifted her head high, her roar splitting the air, and then, with one great, powerful beat of her wings, she took to the sky. Ellen stood rooted to the spot, watching in awe as Gyrith soared above him, her wings cutting through the air like a giant shadow. The wind howled around him, and the sea roared, but he didn't move. He knew Gyrith wasn't trying to flee. She was trying to fight the power inside her. She was trying to keep it contained, but Ellen could feel the weight of the curse in the air, the dark force that had taken root in her soul so long ago. He couldn't let her fight this alone. He couldn't let her carry the burden of the curse on her own dot as the dragon soared higher. Ellen looked up at the blood moon. There had to be something he could do. The ancient texts, his father had spoken of the ones that mentioned the bond between dragons and humans. Surely there was something in them that could help. But it would take more than just knowledge. It would take trust. It would take both of them, working together. Jareth's wings flapped once more, and the storm around them intensified. The wind was deafening now, and the sea was crashing against the shore, its waves reaching higher and higher, as though trying to pull everything into the depths. But then, in the midst of the chaos, Ellen heard Jareth's voice, faint but clear, cutting through the storm. "Help me." The plea was so quiet, so filled with pain, that Ellen's heart broke. He didn't hesitate. He couldn't. He knew what he had to do. Ellen ran toward the cliff, where the waves were crashing against the rocks below. He could see Jareth above him, her massive wings beating furiously as she struggled against the power inside her. He reached into the pouch at his side and pulled out the old, worn scroll his father had given him. It contained the knowledge of his ancestors, the ancient magic that had once bound dragons and humans together. Without a second thought, Ellen unrolled the scroll, the ink fading with age, but still legible. He began to chant the words written there, words that had not been spoken in centuries. The words were a prayer, a call to the ancient powers that had once linked dragons and humans. "By the bond of old, I call to you," Ellen whispered, his voice steady despite the raging storm around him. "Come to her aid, break the chains of darkness, and restore what was lost." As he spoke, the air around him seemed to shift. The winds, though still howling, seemed to calm, and the sea grew still. The storm, which had raged with such fury, began to subside, as though it had heard his plea. Jareth's eyes flickered down to him, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she seemed to recognize him. The curse had not yet broken, but the bond they shared, the bond he had always believed in, was real. She could feel it. She began to descend, slowly, her wings folding in as she glided back toward the ground. The light in her eyes, once filled with fear, was now filled with a flicker of hope. But as she landed beside him, the power of the curse still pulsed within her. It was not gone, not yet. But Ellen knew one thing for sure: they were not finished yet. Cliffhanger. As Jareth's feet touched the ground, a sudden roar erupted from the horizon. A dark figure appeared on the edge of the storm, cloaked in shadows, its eyes glowing with malevolent light. The curse was not finished, and neither was their fight. The night was heavy with tension as Ellen raced down the familiar path toward the beach. The village was quiet behind him, the only sound his footsteps crunching against the dirt and stones. The sky above had turned a strange, deep red, and the moon hung low, casting an eerie glow across the sea. Ellen knew what it meant. The blood moon was rising. Jareth had warned him, in the only way she could. That tonight was different. The curse that bound her had grown stronger with each passing day, but tonight, under the light of the blood moon, it would reach its peak. Ellen's heart pounded in his chest, not just from the cold wind that whipped against his face, but from the sense of urgency and fear that had settled deep in his bones. When he reached the shore, the scene before him was unlike anything he had seen before. Jareth was no longer lying still on the rocks. Her massive form stood tall, her head held high, her wings partially unfurled. Her once dull scales now shimmered faintly under the moonlight, and the barnacles that had clung to her for so long had begun to crack and fall away, revealing patches of gleaming white skin underneath. But it wasn't just her appearance that had changed. The air around her seemed charged, as if something powerful was awakening inside her. The sea had grown restless, the waves crashing harder against the shore, pulling at the rocks and pulling at Ellen's very soul. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath. "Ellen, you should not be here." Jareth's voice was low, almost a whisper, but it cut through the air with a weight that made Ellen's heart skip a beat. There was fear in her voice, not for herself, but for him. "I won't leave you," Ellen said firmly, his feet steady on the ground as he moved closer to her. "I promise you I wouldn't." Jareth turned her head toward him, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light of the blood moon. There was a sadness there, a deep sorrow that seemed to go on forever. Ellen could see that she was struggling, caught between the power of the curse and the hope that maybe, just maybe, she could be free. "You don't understand," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "The curse that binds me is stronger than anything I can fight. It has been with me for centuries. The blood moon. It is when the curse reaches its peak. I will not be able to control it. Ellen reached out, his hand trembling as he touched the side of her massive body. I'm not leaving, Jareth. You don't have to face this alone. Jareth's eyes softened, just for a moment. She seemed to understand that he was speaking from the heart, but the sadness in her eyes deepened. She pulled her head back, as if afraid to let him get too close. The barnacles that had fallen from her body seemed to twitch and move, as if alive, crawling back toward her skin like dark, twisted fingers. You don't know what you're asking, she whispered. The power that will awaken tonight will consume everything in its path. It's not just my curse anymore. It has become part of me. If you stay, you could be caught in the storm. Ellen's resolve only grew stronger. I'm not afraid of you, and I'm not afraid of the curse. At his words, something inside Jareth seemed to crack. Her body trembled as she fought against the power that was beginning to rise within her. The sea roared louder, and the winds picked up, howling around them. The full force of the blood moon's power was starting to affect her. Ellen could feel the energy swirling in the air, like a storm about to break. The dragon let out a loud, desperate cry, a sound that echoed through the night. It was the sound of pain. The sound of a creature trying to hold on to something, anything that would keep her from falling. Into the darkness, Ellen stepped forward. His voice steadied despite the fear rising in his chest. I know you're scared, but I won't let you go through this alone. Whatever happens, I'm here. I'll help you find a way. Jareth's eyes flickered, the glow in them shifting from pain to something else, a flicker of hope, faint but unmistakable. For a brief moment, she seemed to consider his words. Then, as if coming to a decision, she lowered her head slightly toward him. I don't know what to do anymore, she admitted, her voice quieter now, almost broken. I've been cursed for so long. I've lost all hope of ever being free. Ellen's heart ached at the sorrow in her voice. You're not lost. Not anymore. We'll figure this out together. But even as he spoke, the air around them grew colder, the winds howling like wolves in the distance. The power that Jareth had been holding back for so long was no longer something she could control. It surged through her body like a wild river, flooding her with energy that was ancient and dangerous. Ellen stumbled back as the dragon's body glowed brighter, the light of the blood moon reflecting off her scales like fire. The barnacles that had clung to her skin began to disintegrate into dust, and her wings unfolded fully, stretching wide against the sky. She let out a roar that seemed to shake the very earth beneath them, the sound both beautiful and terrifying. For a moment, Ellen thought she might collapse from the weight of the curse, but then, something unexpected happened. Jareth's wings beat once, sending a wave of air across the beach. And in that moment, Ellen saw the true power of the dragon that had been hidden for so long. The wind died down, and the waves that had been crashing violently against the shore now began to retreat. The air was still, almost peaceful, as if the storm had passed. But Jareth wasn't finished yet. Her eyes locked onto Ellen's, and for the first time, he saw not a broken creature, but a being of immense strength. There was power in her too, ancient power that had been waiting for the right moment to be set free. I don't know if I can control it, she said quietly, her voice filled with both awe and fear. But I won't hurt you. I promise. Ellen stepped closer to her, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. You won't hurt me, he said firmly, his eyes never leaving hers. We're in this together. Jareth seemed to take a deep breath, her body shuddering as she steadied herself. The energy that had been surging through her began to calm, and the glow in her eyes faded to a soft, steady light. The curse was still there, still powerful, but it was no longer controlling her. Not completely. I'm not free yet, she said softly, her voice now filled with sadness. But I will be, and when that day comes, I'll make sure the curse is broken, once and for all. Ellen smiled, stepping even closer, his hand resting lightly on her scales. We'll do it together, he said. I'm not leaving your side. For the first time in years, Jareth allowed herself to relax. Just a little. She had not been alone in so long, and the comfort of Ellen's presence was something she hadn't known she needed. But now, with him at her side, she felt something stir inside her, a sense of hope that she had long since given up on. Cliffhanger. as the blood moon reached its peak. The earth trembled beneath their feet, and the sky above seemed to tear open. Dark clouds began to swirl ominously, and the wind picked up once again. Something was coming, something darker than the curse. Something that would test their bond and the very future of the dragon and the human. The following days were filled with uncertainty, but Ellen couldn't stop thinking about the dragon. Jareth's image lingered in his mind, her sad, fading eyes. The rough barnacles clinging to her once glorious scales. The quiet sigh she made as she rested on the rocky shore. No matter what anyone else said, he knew there was more to her than just the stories the villagers whispered about each evening. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ellen would leave the village behind, making his way to the beach where Jareth rested. Sometimes he would simply sit beside her, not knowing what to say, not knowing what to do. Other times, he would bring her water from the village well or scraps of food. The dragon never ate, but Ellen continued to offer, hopeful that maybe one day she would trust him enough to accept. He had no idea why he was so drawn to her. There was something about her, something that called to him, as though they shared an unspoken bond. Perhaps it was the fact that she, too, had been left behind, abandoned, forgotten by the world. Ellen knew what it felt like to be overlooked, to be judged based on something beyond your control. And maybe, just maybe, this dragon felt the same way. On the third evening of his visits, Ellen noticed something different. As he approached the shore, the air was thick with tension. The waves crashed harder against the rocks than they had in the past. And Jareth, though still lying on the beach, was restless. Her tail flicked back and forth, and her eyes were wide, darting between the sea and the horizon. Ellen's heart raced. Something was wrong. He quickly made his way to her side, calling out softly, "Jareth? What's wrong?" The dragon didn't respond, but Ellen could feel it a shift in the air, an energy that wasn't there before. He knelt beside her, carefully reaching out to touch the rough barnacles that covered her side. Her skin was warm under his fingers, but there was something more to it. A strange hum seemed to pulse beneath her scales, a rhythm that was both soothing and unsettling at the same time. Ellen pulled his hand back. His curiosity piqued. "What's happening?" he whispered to himself. But before he could wonder further, Jareth let out a low growl, a sound that shook the ground beneath him. For a moment, Ellen froze. He had never heard the dragon make such a sound before. The growl was deep, guttural, and filled with pain. It wasn't a warning or a sign of aggression. It was the sound of something trying to break free. Ellen's heart sank. What was happening to her? Suddenly, the sea surged higher, the waves crashing violently against the rocks, sending salt water spraying into the air. Jareth's eyes glowed faintly, her body trembling. Her wings, once tucked tightly against her sides, began to twitch. Ellen backed away, his hand instinctively reaching for his sword, though he knew that no weapon could harm a creature like her. Still, there was a feeling in the air, something ancient and powerful that made him uneasy. "What's going on, Jareth?" Ellen muttered under his breath, unsure if the dragon could even hear him. Jareth let out another low growl, but this time it was accompanied by a sharp, painful hiss. Ellen's heart tightened. He had to do something. He couldn't stand there, helpless, while the dragon struggled. But what could he do? He was just a human, and she was an ancient, powerful creature, cursed and broken by time. In a moment of panic, Ellen turned and sprinted back toward the village. He needed answers. He needed to understand what was happening to her, to help her in whatever way he could. He had no idea how, but he couldn't give up on her now. He couldn't leave her alone to suffer. As he reached the village, the moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the quiet streets. The villagers were already preparing for the night, their laughter and chatter echoing in the distance. Ellen knew he had to speak to someone who might know more about the dragons, about curses, and about the strange bond he had begun to form with Jareth. He thought of his father, an old, retired soldier who had once told him stories of dragons, how they had once been protectors, guardians of the land, until the kingdom's rulers turned on them, seeking to control their power. His father lived alone on the edge of the village. It had been years since Ellen had spoken to him, but now there was no time to waste. He needed answers. Without hesitation, Ellen knocked on the wooden door of the small cottage. The old man inside took his time to answer, but when he finally opened the door, his face softened when he saw Ellen standing there. "Ellen?" His father's voice was gravelly, worn with age. "What brings you here at this hour?" "I need your help, father," Ellen said, his voice urgent. "It's about the dragon, Jareth. She's changing, and I don't understand why." The old man's face darkened at the mention of the dragon. He sighed deeply, his eyes narrowing as he glanced over his shoulder before pulling Ellen inside. "Come in, son. I've been expecting you." Ellen raised an eyebrow. "Expecting me?" His father gave a tired smile. "I knew this day would come. I hoped it wouldn't, but I knew it would. You've always had a soft spot for the forgotten ones, haven't you?" Ellen sat down across from his father, listening closely as the old man began to speak. "There's more to Jareth than you know," his father said quietly. "More than any of us can fully understand. She's not just a dragon. She's part of an ancient pact, a curse, if you will, that was placed on our kind long ago." Ellen frowned. "What kind of curse?" His father leaned forward, his voice low. "The dragons were once the protectors of the land, as you know. But centuries ago, the rulers of this kingdom grew afraid of their power. They feared the dragons would one day rise up and take back what was theirs: the land, the sky, the sea. So, they made a deal with dark forces. A curse was placed upon Jareth and her kin. They were bound to the sea, bound to live out their days alone, forgotten by the world." Ellen's heart sank as he realized the truth of his father's words. Jareth wasn't just a victim of neglect. She was a prisoner of an ancient curse, bound by magic far stronger than anything he could fight. No wonder she was struggling. "I have to help her," Ellen said, determination rising in his chest. "I won't let her suffer any longer." His father sighed, shaking his head. "You can't undo a curse like that, son. It's too powerful. Even the most skilled sorcerers have failed." But Ellen wasn't ready to give up. "I have to try. There must be something I can do." His father's eyes softened. "Perhaps, but it will come at a cost. If you're truly determined to help her, you must be prepared to sacrifice something. It won't be easy." "I'm ready," Ellen said, his voice steady. "I won't leave her alone." Cliffhanger. The next evening, as the blood moon began to rise, casting an eerie red glow across the sky, Ellen rushed back to the shore. Jareth's form loomed in the distance, her eyes glowing faintly. But something was different. The air was thick with tension. Something was about to happen. As he approached, Ellen could feel the power that had been building within her, ready to break free. But would Jareth be able to control it? Or would the curse consume them both? The sun had long set in the kingdom of Varkar, and the moon shone coldly over the vast, mist-covered sea. On the rocky beach, where the land met the dark waters, an ancient creature lay, forgotten by time and dismissed by the world. Jareth, the albino dragon, was an impossible sight, a creature of legend now covered in barnacles, her once glowing scales dulled by years of neglect. The world had moved on, and the dragons had disappeared, leaving behind only stories of their greatness. Jareth, however, remained an outcast, left to suffer on the shores of this forgotten land. Her great wings were torn and battered from years of storms, her body scarred by the years spent drifting in solitude. The world no longer feared dragons, nor did they revere them. The kingdom of Varkar had long since abandoned the magic of the old world. People no longer believed in dragons. They had grown too busy with their own affairs, to focus on progress, to remember the ancient bonds that had once connected their kind. To the mighty beasts, the village near the coast spoke little of the dragon, and when they did, it was only to tell stories to scare their children. The dragons cursed, the villagers would whisper. Better to leave it be, but none of them dared to come near, to learn the truth of the creature that had once soared across the skies like a goddess of old. Ellen, a young soldier in the kingdom's army, had heard the rumors too. He had heard them for years, growing up with tales of the dragon who haunted the shores. But unlike the others, Ellen didn't fear the creature. No, something in him stirred a strange curiosity. Maybe it was his family's long history as keepers of dragons, a responsibility passed down through generations, or maybe it was simply his own heart, which could not ignore the suffering of a creature left behind. One evening, as the sea mist rolled in thick and heavy, Ellen set out on his own, ignoring his orders to stay within the safety of the village. With his cloak wrapped tightly around him and his sword by his side, he made his way to the beach where the dragon was said to rest. The villagers had often spoken of the dragon's presence, how it had been seen only in the dead of night, its eyes glowing faintly, its wings spread wide like the shadow of death. But when Ellen arrived, there was no roar, no flash of sharp teeth. There was only silence, thick and heavy, as if the world had forgotten the dragon's true power. There, lying among the sharp rocks and the seaweed, was Gyrith. She was enormous, her body curled in a way that made her appear smaller than she truly was. Her wings, once mighty and covered in shimmering white scales, now looked like tattered sails. Barely clinging to her back, Ellen approached cautiously, unsure of what to do. The dragon's breathing was slow, shallow, almost like she was asleep. But the barnacles that clung to her scales were a sign of just how long she had been abandoned. The once beautiful dragon was a living reminder of the world's apathy. For a long moment, Ellen simply stood there, staring at the creature. He didn't feel fear. Instead, there was only pity and a strange sadness that he could not explain. This creature, this once mighty beast, had been left to rot by the very people who should have protected her. He could not understand how anyone could forget such a magnificent creature. His fingers twitched, itching to touch the dragon's scales, but he hesitated. What if she was dangerous? What if the stories of her being cursed were true? The villagers had said that the dragon would attack anyone who dared to come near her. But Ellen didn't believe that. He had heard the old stories of dragons. He had learned about their intelligence, their emotions, their ability to understand humans. He had to believe that the dragon was not evil, that she was simply misunderstood. Like so many others in this world, taking a deep breath, Ellen stepped forward, moving slowly, carefully, until he was standing just a few feet away from the dragon. He could see the pain in her eyes, though they were clouded by exhaustion. Her large head was turned toward him, and though she didn't move, her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that made his heart race. "Hello," Ellen whispered softly, unsure of what to say. It felt ridiculous, talking to a dragon, especially one so covered in barnacles and bruised by time. But he couldn't help himself. There was something about her that called to him. "I won't hurt you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The dragon's eyes flickered for a moment, as if considering his words. But she didn't respond. There was a moment of stillness, and Ellen wondered if she even remembered how to speak, or if, after years of loneliness, she had forgotten how to trust anyone. Ellen crouched down to get a closer look at the barnacles that covered her body. His fingers brushed lightly against the rough surface of the sea-scraped barnacles, and as he did, he saw the dragon's body twitch. For a moment, he thought she might lash out, but instead, there was a deep, shuddering sigh that came from her chest, almost like a whisper of relief. "Don't worry," Ellen murmured again, feeling a strange connection to the creature. "I'm not going to leave you like the others." He wasn't sure why he felt so determined to stay. Perhaps it was because he had always been taught to protect those who needed help, to stand up for the forgotten and the abandoned. Or maybe it was because he saw something in the dragon, a part of her that was still alive, still holding on, even though the world had long since moved on. As the night drew on, Ellen didn't leave. He sat down beside the dragon, his back against a rock, watching the waves crash on the shore. Time seemed to stretch out, and the world around him faded away until there was only the dragon and the sound of the sea. He didn't know how long he sat there, but eventually the dragon stirred again, her eyes fluttering open. This time, they weren't dull or clouded. There was something in them, something that seemed to recognize him, just for a moment. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the recognition was gone, replaced again by the cold, distant gaze of a creature who had long since learned not to trust. Ellen's heart tightened in his chest. He knew that Gyrith had been alone for far too long. He knew that she had been left to suffer by those who had once sworn to protect her. But he wasn't like them. He wouldn't turn away. He couldn't. There was something in her, something alive that needed him as much as he needed her. "I'll be back tomorrow," Ellen promised quietly, though he knew she couldn't understand his words. He stood slowly, brushing the sand from his pants, and turned to leave. But as he took a step away, something deep within him told him that this was only the beginning of a bond between a human and a dragon, one that neither of them could have predicted. Cliffhanger. As Ellen made his way back toward the village, the moonlight caught on Jareth's scales, making them glimmer faintly. Her eyes followed him, and for the briefest of moments, Ellen could have sworn that he saw a flicker of hope in her gaze. But just as quickly, it was gone, swallowed by the darkness of the night. Would the dragon ever truly trust him? Or would he become just another person who failed her? The figure in the distance was a shadow, its shape looming ominously against the fading storm. Jareth and Ellen stood side by side, both breathing heavily, their bodies still charged with the energy of the curse that had almost consumed them. The storm had calmed, but the danger was far from over. The dark figure was coming closer, its eyes glowing red, casting an eerie light that matched the blood moon overhead. Ellen felt his heart pound as he looked at Jareth. He had hoped that the worst was behind them, that the curse was finally being broken. But this new threat was unlike anything they had encountered. The air was thick with tension, and Ellen's mind raced for any solution, any way to protect Jareth from the growing darkness. "What is that?" Ellen asked, his voice tight with fear. Jareth's eyes narrowed, her wings flexing as she stood taller. "I don't know, but I've felt its presence before. It's the force that bound me to the curse all those years ago. The one who cursed me." Ellen's stomach tightened. "A sorcerer?" Jareth nodded, her gaze fixed on the figure as it approached. "Not just any sorcerer. He is the one who created the curse, the one who cursed my kind to be forgotten and lost forever. He was a king once, but he was corrupted by his hunger for power. He used dark magic to bind us." The figure grew closer, and Ellen could now see the details of the sorcerer's form. His cloak billowed in the wind, and his face was hidden behind a hood. But there was something chilling about him. It was as if the shadows clung to him, drawn to his very being. He exuded a dark power that made the air around him feel heavier, colder. "We have to stop him," Ellen said, a sense of urgency rising in his chest. He glanced at Jareth, her body still radiating the faint glow from the blood moon. "Together, we can fight him. We can end this curse once and for all." Jareth turned to him, her eyes filled with both gratitude and sorrow. "You are brave, Ellen, but this is not a fight you can win alone. The curse is ancient, and its power is beyond anything I can control. The sorcerer is not just my enemy. He is yours too." Ellen felt a chill run down his spine. He had known from the beginning that helping Jareth would come with danger. But now, standing on the edge of this battle, he understood the true cost of what he had promised. The sorcerer raised his hand, and the air around them thickened, like a storm gathering strength. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, and the dark figure spoke, his voice like the scraping of stone. "You are fools to think you can break my curse." The sorcerer said, his voice echoing in the night, "I created it. I am its master. You cannot defeat me." Ellen's heart raced as he reached for his sword. He knew he had to act quickly. But before he could move, Jareth stepped forward. Her wings spread wide, and her voice rang out, powerful and commanding. "You may have created the curse," she said, her voice strong, "but you did not bind my soul. I have fought your darkness for centuries, and I will not stop now. You cannot control me anymore." The sorcerer's eyes flared with rage, and he raised his hand higher, the shadows swirling around him like a storm cloud. Dark tendrils of magic shot out from his fingertips, aiming directly at ZHYRITH. Without thinking, Ellen moved. He lunged toward the sorcerer, raising his sword to block the incoming spell. The dark magic hit his sword with a force that nearly knocked him off his feet. But he held his ground. "Jareth!" Ellen shouted, "Now!" Jareth let out a mighty roar, her wings slicing through the air. With a powerful flap, she soared into the sky, her body glowing with the energy of the curse that had almost consumed her. She dove toward the sorcerer, her eyes burning with the light of determination. The sorcerer's magic crackled through the air, but Jareth was faster. She twisted in midair, her body moving with grace and power that only a dragon could possess. Her claws extended, and with one mighty swipe, she slashed through the sorcerer's dark shield. Breaking it apart like fragile glass, the sorcerer screamed in fury, his dark power flaring out of control. His cloak whipped around him as if the wind itself was trying to consume him. "You cannot escape your fate, dragon," he shouted, his voice a low, menacing growl. "You were meant to fall, all of you." But Jareth was no longer the broken creature who had once roamed the shore in despair. She was a force of nature, a living being full of power and will. With another roar, she surged forward, her energy pulsing through the air like thunder. Ellen watched, his heart pounding in his chest, as the dragon and the sorcerer clashed. The battle was fierce, magic and fire swirling around them. The sorcerer's spells crackled with dark energy, but Jareth's strength and speed were unmatched. Every strike she made broke through his defenses, and with each blow, she seemed to get stronger. But the sorcerer was not defeated yet. He raised both hands, and a swirling vortex of darkness began to form between them. "You are nothing," he spat. "You are just a weapon, a beast to be controlled." Jareth's eyes glowed brighter as she shot toward him, determined to end this once and for all. But Ellen could see it. He could see the strain on her body, the way she was fighting not just the sorcerer, but the curse inside her as well. She was at her limit. Without thinking, Ellen rushed forward. His heart raced as he ran to Jareth's side, his sword still in hand. He didn't know what he could do to help, but he knew he couldn't let her fight alone. "Jareth," he called out, his voice filled with urgency. "You can do this." She turned to him, her eyes softening for a moment, and for the first time, he saw the full depth of her pain. But there was something else in her gaze, to something stronger than the curse. Something that had been growing between them, trust. She believed in him, just as he believed in her. With a final, mighty roar, Jareth unleashed all the power she had left, sending a brilliant flash of light toward the sorcerer. The force of the blast was enough to knock the sorcerer off his feet, his dark magic faltering under the weight of her strength. The sorcerer staggered, his body racked with pain. "No," he screamed, his power starting to crack. "This can't be." But it was too late. Jareth's light pierced through the sorcerer's darkness, and with a final, powerful surge of energy, the curse that had bound her for centuries shattered. The sorcerer's screams faded into silence as the darkness around him dissolved, leaving only the stillness of the night. Jareth hovered in the air, breathing heavily, her wings fluttering weakly. The glow from her scales began to dim, and the power that had surged through her faded away. Leaving her exhausted but free, Ellen ran to her side, his heart in his throat as he reached out to touch her. "You did it. You're free." Jareth lowered herself gently to the ground, her eyes filled with relief. "We did it," she whispered. Together, the first rays of dawn began to break through the dark sky, casting golden light across the beach. The storm had passed, and the world seemed to breathe again, as though it had been holding its breath all night. Jareth, now free from the curse, stood beside Ellen, her form still strong, but no longer weighed down by the darkness that had once controlled her. "You're no longer alone," Ellen said, his voice full of hope. "We can rebuild everything together." Jareth's eyes softened as she gazed at him, her heart full of something she hadn't felt in centuries. Hope. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude, "for not giving up on me." The sun rose fully, casting a warm light over the world. The curse had been broken, the darkness had been vanquished, and for the first time in a long time, both dragon and human could finally look to the future. Together,